Thank you very much. Well, it's absolutely an honor to be here in Melbourne, a place I've always wanted to come, being half Calabrese and knowing of the strong Calabrese immigration that there is here. So I'm excited about discovering more. But it's even more of an honor to come here and talk to you about California Italians and the spaces they share with Latinos. Hence, the title of my presentation, Living Transcultural Spaces in John Fante's Ask the Dust, Italians and Latinos in the West. A significant feature of Italian-American literature is the relationship that evolves between Italian immigrant communities and the communities of other immigrants who shared tight spaces in tenements, competition for jobs, and moments of realization about their common diaspora status in the United States, which often began through the baptism of fire that was entry through Ellis Island. In novel after novel, Italians are depicted interacting with Irish, German, Jews, Poles, and Ukrainians, to name but a few of the groups whose day-to-day struggle has been immortalized in the pages of these works. And while the other groups are named in these novels, they are rarely, if ever, engaged with empathetically, remaining instead outsiders in the evolving narrative of Italian Americana. They operate as silo cultures primarily and ethnicities, marrying among themselves, staunchly focused on the toils and troubles of their families and their own extended diasporic family communities. Yet much of this history has been relegated to an era that is rarely acknowledged in America today, for it constitutes the past of white immigration with groups that have assimilated and even blissfully forgotten the history of their ancestors, especially in light of the escalating discrimination against people of color, that is, visible minorities. In this scenario of ethnic and diasporic amnesia, there is perhaps no group that has more at stake than Italian Americans, who still carry some ethnic markers of name, look, for some, habits, and religion, and who might still actively retrieve them and consolidate them into a proud diasporic migrant identity that has much to share with those who are in transit today in the United States, especially Latinos and especially Mexicans, of course, as we know from Trump's wanting to build the wall. Many of us have noted how Italian Americans should remember their past as today's migrations are confronted. There is actually a quote here from the New York Times that talks about the connections between Hispanics, the new Italians, to gauge the progress of an immigrant group. The ideal comparison is not between the second and third generations in 2013 and the first generation in 2013. It is between the later generations and their actual parents and grandparents. James P. Smith, an economist at the Rand Corporation, has done such complex, longitudinal work and finds that the trajectory of Latinos most deeply resembles that of Italians, who also arrived with comparatively little education. And there's certainly a lot more work to be done. There's a lot to be said about that topic. But what I want to talk about today are the diasporic synergies that unite Italian Americans and Latinos through literature. But first, let's just look very quickly at some immigration statistics here. Of course, Ask the Dust was published in 1939, and we see this a bump in the 30s. Of course, if we look at what happens afterwards and is going on now, there's this huge rise. But there is this 1930s bump. And here on this map, even though it is focusing on destinations for Central American immigrants in the United States and not the immigration at that time. At that time, it mainly was for Mexicans, Latinos. It was Los Angeles, and I think still today that very large circle over the area of Los Angeles is still indicative and still speaks to us. So I just wanted to give us some parameters. So I will focus on the novelistic rendering of crossed diasporas, Latino and Italian, in John Fante's Ask the Dust. There are many parallels with the situation in the United States today, and I think it's one of the reasons that Latinos themselves are looking back at Ask the Dust. I'm going to talk about Hector Tobar, New York Times bestseller author, born in Los Angeles. He is the author of a work called Translation Nation. He's talking about, this is an article that he wrote only a week after Trump was elected. And he wrote, "The Spanish lesson I never got at school. In the deepest reaches of my brain, there's a boy who speaks Spanish. He calls his mother and father, mama and papa. One of his favorite expressions is, que lindo, how nice, how sweet. He's proud of the Mexican slang he's learned, for instance, no hay pedo, which means no problem, though its literal translation is, there is no fart. California nearly killed that boy. Well, we are glad that that boy never died and are doing our best to ensure that he never risks death again. Increasing numbers of Spanish speakers write about these experiences. Tobar is particularly well known for the book I had just mentioned, Translation Nation, where he personally goes into all of the areas described in the volumes of educational policy where numbers of Latinos are on the rise. He travels from Los Angeles through California to the heartland and the South to understand firsthand how Latinos are forging new identities, redefining diaspora, reinventing identities of mobility and community. Tobar, however, begins in his hometown of Los Angeles, which he describes as a city of peasants. And here you can see this in the part one. Talking about Americanism, Americanismo, or American identity, which he thinks about through the lens of Latinos who seek citizenship. In particular, he is telling the story of two brothers, one who becomes a citizen, the other who has run-ins with the law and must flee across the border. As he contemplated these two brothers and named his chapter on Los Angeles a city of peasants, there is every reason to believe that he had John Fante in mind. Fante and Camila Lopez, peasants, to be sure, one from Italy, the one from Mexico, one who became a citizen, the other who crossed the law and had to flee, perishing in the Mojave Desert. Tobar actually wrote about Ask the Dust for NPR's All Things Considered in 2011 in their series, You Must Read This. Entitled Dusting Off a Gritty, Glamorous California Classic, he wrote, "People think of Los Angeles as a city without a past, but as a native Angelino, I stumble upon the relics of its history all the time. The rails of our long ago vanished streetcars embedded in the asphalt, for example. There are many novels that can give readers a sense of what it was like to live in that old LA. It's a city of men in fedoras and women in broad-shouldered dresses. But it's John Fante, largely forgotten outside Los Angeles, who best brings the passion, the possibility, and the hurt of that glamorous city to life, especially in his 1939 novel, Ask the Dust. Ask the Dust is the story of Fante's alter ego, Arturo Bandini. Like Fante himself, Bandini has come to LA from Colorado during the Great Depression. His dream is to be a great writer, but his so far minuscule royalty checks allow him nothing better than a room in Bunker Hill, a neighborhood of worn-out apartments and sagging Victorian mansions overlooking downtown. Fante populates Ask the Dust with people who've come from the colder corners of the U.S. The bright daylight that makes the California palm trees grow tall unsettles them. Many are drifting, lost Midwesterners, searching for wealth and happiness, and they've arrived in L.A., as Fante writes, with the dust of Chicago and Cincinnati and Cleveland on their boots, doomed to die in the sun. As Bandini toils away in his hotel room, writing short stories, he daydreams about Camila Lopez, a Mexican-American waitress at his local bar. She soon becomes the mysterious, tragic presence at the center of Ask the Dust. Their romance is angry and conflicted. They fight on the beach and on Wilshire Boulevard, where Camila teases Bandini and scandalizes passers-by with a flash of her bare legs. When Bandini taunts her with ethnic slurs, she shoots back that she's just as American as he is. Bandini's obsession with Camila carries him across the LA landscape, and as I read their story, I see a city that's familiar to me. It's a place where people are slowly realizing that paradise can be a very unhappy destination indeed. It's a multi-ethnic city too, with Filipinos and Japanese kids playing football and Jewish refugees and scenes inside LA's Black Belt. It's an LA that's glitzy and polished and sexy, but also desolate and lonely. Today, more than 70 years later, Fante's old Bunker Hill neighborhood is gone. But now as then, Americans are on the move again, uprooted by hard times. They're seeking better lives in other booming Sunbelt cities. It's an old American story. We seek, we suffer, we carry our ambitions and our obsessions to new places. And it's a story told with great verve and heart in John Fante's unforgettable novel, Ask the Dust. I thought this very long quote here was very important to show how a Latino is using Fante as a way of reflecting on his own experience in LA. Tobar's connection with Fante is important, for it exemplifies what has changed in the view of diaspora, now expressed as the quintessential human condition. The Latinos of his life and experience, Camila Lopez and Fante, the writer who expressed it best, who saw not the diaspora as having a definitive start and finish with assimilation, but instead the very essence of humanity. Fante resonates with Latinos who read Ask the Dust, and I know this from my own Latino students, as did Hobar, seeing in the ambitions of Fante and Camila in their burning passion for each other with no resolution, a metaphor for the impossibility of redemption in belonging in a transient city. That though they embrace it as a, quote, sad flower in the sand, one of the most crushingly beautiful descriptions of LA ever written by Fante in his work, only as transient as they are, offering no roots, only the temporary respite from the next shiftless day. And Los Angeles, the city of peasants, as Tobar has described it, hosts two peasants in its gritty heat, Arturo and Camila, both of whom suffer from imposter complexes at the very brief stretches of striving to be who they are not and cannot be, immediately casting off of their own volition any semblance of adaptation to the people they momentarily think they should be. Fante relates this brilliantly through his use of material objects, the huarache sandals that he chides Camila for wearing, only to find that his desire for her wanes as she attempts to perform her waitress duties in the stiff, high-heeled white shoes she has bought. She is no longer swaying with her serving tray, the shoes impeding her creativity. Fante obsesses over those huaraches, dreaming of holding them close to his heart before he falls asleep. Ethnic markers, ethnic nostalgia, his own as well. Fante likewise is uncomfortable in the suit of clothes he has purchased, a suit with two pairs of pants, of which he wears one during his hyperbolic episode of fastidiousness that he carries so far as to disgust himself, tearing off the new clothes in a fit of anger at himself, rapidly digging his old clothes out of the trash and donning them once again so he feels like himself. He can't do it, and neither can Camila. But there are many, many elements in this novel that resonate with Latinos, not the least of which is Fante's hurling of epithets such as filthy little greaser at Camila Lopez, only to immediately reveal that the same exact epithet had been hurled his way too, as he remorsefully took it back. His confessional anxiety about his racism and recognition of it as self-loathing deconstruct the mechanism of racial tensions, diffusing them and laying them bare. But perhaps most of all is Fante's intimate knowledge of Mexican immigrant history in the Californio period, with the romanticizing of a Spanish past, with haciendas, horses, and lovely señoritas beckoning to Midwesterners and Easterners to come west, when instead, upon arrival, all they would find was Alvaro Street. As Daniel Gardner has pointed out in a recent article entitled A Ramona in Reverse. The fact that the epithet filthy little greaser is used to refer to both Italians and Mexicans in Fante's novel also reduced the ethnic distance between them. Every time he tries out his wise guy antics on Camilla, they fail miserably. But perhaps most important, and actually here is from the LA Times, 1931, an article about the families embarking back, and I mean it's interesting for a number of reasons. Horde departs for native soil, but one of the things I think is most interesting is the way they're dressed. You know, this recalls Camilla putting on those white shoes. They're dressed very nicely. They have, somewhat assimilated in Los Angeles. They certainly return, no longer the peasants they had come, but they're returning anyway. There will be a lot more to say about this deportation. So this was the Mexican repatriation, the mass deportation of people from the United States to Mexico between 1929 and 1936. That Fante is really the backdrop of his novel. In rhetoric that maps perfectly onto Trump's language about Mexican immigrants being a threat to our economy, Mexican Americans, many of whom were citizens, were blamed for the economic crash of those years. With the border close by and the Mexicans physically distinguishable, it was easy to round them up in their barrios and force them to repatriate. Mexicans were easy targets because of, quote, the proximity of the Mexican border, the physical distinctiveness of mestizos, and their easily identifiable barrios, which made raids and roundups easy, just as it does today. It is estimated that between 500,000 to 2 million people were repatriated, of whom some 60% were U.S.-born citizens. Many scholars today consider it nothing less than race-based ethnic cleansing. Camilo tells Arturo she's American as he is, but she knows that she risks deportation, this Americanismo, as Tobar has explained it, always on the verge of going either way. To pick up on what we were alluding to at the beginning of this paper, one of the most innovative features of Fante's Ask the Dust as an Italian-American novel is its ability to step out of its own diasporic delusion and engage forcefully with diaspora tout court. By giving equal time to the Mexican migrants, by unblinkingly examining the phenomenon of diaspora to include those to whose fate he shared and ultimately embraced. As he cast his book dedicated to Camila out into the desert night sky, he tied his diaspora to hers, still on the move, incapable of being held fast even by the book. But the Fante archives hold a coda to this story. This is a presentation that was done by my colleague Stephen Cooper, who is the Fante expert par excellence when the archive went to UCLA. There is a piece with Fante's reflections on Los Angeles in 1977, some 38 years after writing Ask the Dust. The change from the time that I got here in 1933 and today is unrecognizable. What was there in 33 is all gone. It's all gone. And the city, the central city, the downtown area has been completely taken over by Mexicans. They have it now, and of course the population statistics, there are 11 million of them here now. And they and the blacks have taken over that central city, and they are moving west as far as La Brea. And it's remarkable and incongruous. It's like another place. It could be Hong Kong or some city in the Far East. It's crowded, and the people are now of Oriental or Latin or Mexican origin, or they're blacks, and the whites are moving away, and one gets a sense of its strangeness when he goes back, as I did when I go back there. I really don't know it very well now. The charm and the rusticity and the simple beauty and leisurely existence of that time is all gone, and it's now a dog-eat-dog place where cheap labor is fighting for jobs, and they have a very difficult time, and they're pitiful, and it's very sad when you see them. And he goes on here, but what is interesting about this is he goes back and forth between having adopted this very kind of white rhetoric, but at the same time evoking his own ethnic past. And here's the way this piece of it ends. There's a sense of danger about it and a sense of not being a part of anything you want. And it's also a sense of great pity for the people who have come across the border. These hungry people who want nothing more than a job and a chance to send a few dollars home. They're all up here and they think there's something very magic about it. And yet they suffer like they never suffered in Mexico. They're kicked around and thoroughly disliked and accused of all manner of crimes. And the whole town has just gone to pot. On the west side, it's different, of course, from Fairfax all the way out to the coast here. And then he goes on about how he is now part of that other LA. Fante bravely tried to write his history, his way out of that history, placing himself now on the west side, writing himself white in Hollywood. Yet the paths of the immigrant experience remain. Denouncing that LA now, with all of its Mexicans, its mixed ethnicities, he sends this mixed message with his white speak interspersed with his memory of himself as a diasporic Italian. In 1980, I'm almost done. Charles Bukowski enthusiastically wrote a preface for Ask the Dust and gave the novel new life, as we all know. He went to visit Fante in the motion picture convalescent home where he was blind, ravaged by diabetes, and told him about what he was doing. This gave Fante a great deal of energy, and for over a 2-month period, he dictated his final work, Dreams from Bunker Hill, returning to 1933, to his roots in the Los Angeles that was his real spiritual home, the Los Angeles of Arturo Bandini and Camilo Lopez, the Los Angeles of Hector Tobar, and Italians and Latinos who share it as a diasporic space to which they may both return. And here's the Fante sign now in the square, John Fante, writer of short stories, novels, and screenplays. Thank you very much.